The crack of a gunshot echoed through the canyon, but Zachariah Jericho barely flinched as he raked his calloused fingers through his horse's mane. The bullet had missed him by inches, embedding itself into the red rock behind him. That was the third time this month someone had tried to kill him, and frankly, he was getting tired of it. "Show yourself," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the empty landscape of eastern Wyoming Territory. It was 1876, and the promise of gold and opportunity had brought all manner of folk to these parts, some honest, most not. No one answered his call. Whoever had taken the shot was long gone, disappearing into the maze of rock formations that dotted the landscape outside of Rawlins. Zach spat into the dust and mounted his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chester. It was getting late, and storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. He needed to get back to his homestead before the skies opened up. The ride back to his property took nearly an hour. His land sat a comfortable distance from Rawlins, not so far that supplies became an issue, but far enough that he could avoid most of the town's nonsense. As his cabin came into view, Zach's face fell. The roof, which he'd been meaning to fix for the better part of a year, was in worse shape than ever. Half the wooden shingles on the east side were missing or hanging precariously, and he could see a gaping hole near the chimney. "Another thing to deal with," he muttered as he dismounted and led Chester to the small stable beside the cabin. He tended to his horse, fed the few chickens that pecked around the yard, and went inside to escape the first droplets of rain. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A wooden table with 2 chairs sat near the stone fireplace. His bed was pushed against the far wall, beneath the worst part of the leaking roof. He'd positioned a collection of pots and buckets to catch the drips, but it was a losing battle. The storm hit in earnest, and soon the ping of raindrops on metal created a chaotic melody throughout the cabin. Zach lit an oil lamp and sat heavily in his chair, pulling off his boots. At 34, he felt much older. 10 years of ranching, bounty hunting, and surviving in the Wyoming Territory had weathered him, leaving lines on his face and a permanent furrow between his brows. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray at the temples, and the beard he kept trimmed close to his jawline was following suit. He ate a simple supper of beans and salt pork, listening to the rain pound against the roof. A particularly loud crack of thunder made the walls shake, and suddenly, a new leak sprouted directly over his bed. Zach cursed, moving to salvage his relatively dry blankets. "Damn roof," he muttered, knowing full well he had a stack of wooden shingles sitting in the shed out back. He'd bought them in Rawlins last spring, intending to fix the roof before winter set in. That winter had come and gone, and now it was early summer again. The truth was, he simply hadn't bothered. What was the point of fixing a roof when it was just him living under it? Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by the constant dripping and the need to empty overflowing buckets. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a brilliant blue sky that mocked his sleepless night. Zach emerged from his cabin, squinting against the sunlight. He had business in town supplies to purchase and possibly information to gather about who might be taking shots at him. Rawlins was growing rapidly since the Union Pacific Railroad had established a station there. What had once been little more than a water stop for steam engines was now a proper frontier town, complete with a general store, a saloon, and even a small hotel. As Zach rode down the muddy Main Street, he nodded to the few familiar faces he passed. He wasn't known for being friendly, but he wasn't an outright hermit either. He hitched Chester outside the general store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. Walter Jenkins, the storekeeper, looked up from where he was helping a customer, a woman Zach had never seen before. She was turned away from him, examining a bolt of fabric, but he could see she had hair the color of honey gathered in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. "Be with you in a moment, Mr. Jericho," Jenkins called out before turning back to the woman. "As I was saying, Miss Landry, we're expecting a shipment of finer fabrics next month, if you're willing to wait." I'm afraid I need something sooner rather than later, the woman replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. This will have to do. When she turned around, Zach found himself looking into the most startlingly blue eyes he'd ever seen. They reminded him of the Wyoming sky after a storm, clear and bright, and somehow both delicate and fierce at once. The woman Miss Landry, Jenkins had called her, was perhaps in her late 20s, with fine features and a stubborn set to her chin. She wore a practical traveling dress of deep green, noticeably free of the excessive frills and bustles that were fashionable back east. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, gathering her purchases. Zach stepped aside as she approached the door, tipping his hat out of ingrained courtesy. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," she said over her shoulder. "I'll return tomorrow for those supplies we discussed." As she passed Zach, he caught the scent of lavender, a surprising bit of femininity in this rough-edged town. He watched through the window as she crossed the street, heading toward the hotel. "New in town?" Zach asked Jenkins as he approached the counter. "Just arrived on yesterday's train," Jenkins confirmed, arranging the coins she'd left into his register. "Miss Sophia Landry. Says she's planning to stay a while, bought the old Wilkins place out past your property." Zach's eyebrows shot up. "The abandoned homestead, that place is barely standing," Jenkins shrugged. "She paid good money for it, seems determined. Says she's got plans to start a small school for the children around these parts. A schoolteacher." That explained the refined way she carried herself, but taking on the Wilkins place was foolhardy at best. The previous owners had left after a particularly harsh winter 3 years back, and the property had been sitting empty ever since. Like his own cabin, it desperately needed repairs far more extensive than his, in fact. "She's going to need help," Zach muttered, more to himself than to Jenkins. "Reckon she might," the storekeeper agreed. "Now, what can I get for you today?" Zach completed his business quickly, purchasing ammunition, coffee, flour, and a few other necessities. As he was leaving the store, he noticed Miss Landry again, this time standing outside the hotel in conversation with Bill Mason, one of the local freight drivers. She had a determined expression on her face, but Mason was shaking his head emphatically. Curiosity got the better of him. Zach crossed the street, approaching just in time to hear Mason's refusal. "I'm sorry, madam, but I can't take you out there today. Got deliveries heading to the mining camp, and that's the opposite direction. Maybe next week. But Mr. Mason, I need to assess the property as soon as possible." The seller assured me it was in reasonable condition, but the seller was lying through his teeth, Zach interrupted, tipping his hat when they both turned to him. "Pardon the intrusion, but I know the Wilkins place. It needs considerable work." Sophia Landry straightened her shoulders, regarding him with a mixture of surprise and wariness. Up close, she was even more striking, her blue eyes set against fair skin that hadn't yet been weathered by Wyoming's harsh climate. "And you are?" she asked. "Zachariah Jericho. My property borders what used to be the Wilkins homestead to the south." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Jenkins mentioned you. He said you might be able to tell me about the condition of the property." "I can do better than that," Zach found himself saying, though he wasn't sure why he was offering. "I can take you there now if you'd like to see it for yourself." Mason looked relieved. "There's your solution, Miss Landry. Jericho here knows that area better than anyone." She hesitated, studying Zach with those penetrating blue eyes. He knew what she saw: a rough-looking cowboy with a reputation for keeping to himself, hardly the sort of escort a proper Eastern lady would choose. But she was also clearly desperate to see her purchase. "That's very kind, Mr. Jericho, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. I'm heading back that way anyhow." This wasn't strictly true, but for some reason he felt compelled to help her. Perhaps it was the stubborn determination in her expression, or maybe it was simply that she reminded him of what civilization looked like, something he'd nearly forgotten. She considered for another moment, then nodded. "Very well. I accept your offer. I'll need to gather a few things from my room." "I'll wait here," Zach said, moving to stand beside Chester, While Miss Landry went to collect her belongings, Mason leaned in. "You sure about this, Jericho? She doesn't have any idea what she's getting into with that property." "Which is exactly why someone should show her," Zach replied. "Better she knows now what she's facing." Mason snorted. "Always figured you for a loner, never took you for a rescuer of damsels." Zach's expression hardened. "She doesn't strike me as a damsel needing rescue, just someone who deserves honest information." Before Mason could respond, Miss Landry emerged from the hotel carrying a small leather satchel. She had added a practical bonnet to her ensemble, tied securely beneath her chin. "I'm ready, Mr. Jericho," she announced, approaching with confident strides. "You'll need to ride with me," Zach said, gesturing to Chester. "It's about an hour's ride." She looked momentarily flustered, glancing from him to the horse and back again. "I had planned to arrange for a horse of my own, but I haven't had the opportunity yet." "We can see to that tomorrow," Zach said, offering his hand. "For now, Chester here is strong enough to carry us both." After a brief hesitation, she took his hand, allowing him to help her up onto the saddle. Zach swung up behind her, keeping a respectable distance between them despite the close quarters. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed, taking up the reins. As they rode out of town, he was acutely aware of her rigid posture and the lavender scent that drifted back to him with each step of the horse. They rode in silence for a while, following the rutted dirt road that led east out of Rawlins. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. "What brings you all the way from the east to start a school in Wyoming Territory, Miss Landry?" he asked. She glanced back at him, seeming to weigh how much to share. "I taught in Boston for several years," she finally said. "But the schools there are well established, with rigid hierarchies and little room for new approaches. Out here, there's opportunity to build something from the ground up." "Rawlins is a rough town for a woman alone," Zach observed. She straightened even further if that was possible. "I'm no stranger to challenges, Mr. Jericho, and I believe education is essential, especially in places like this. Every child deserves a chance to learn, regardless of where they live." Her conviction was obvious, and Zach found himself admiring her determination, even if he questioned her practicality. Admirable goals, but they won't matter much if you don't have a solid roof over your head. "Is the property truly in such poor condition?" "I'm afraid so," he admitted. The Wilkins left during the winter of '73. Heavy snow that year. Roof collapsed on the north side of the house, and no one's maintained it since. It's probably home to all manner of critters by now. He felt her shoulders slump slightly. "I see. The land agent in Cheyenne assured me it was a fixer-upper with good bones." Zach couldn't help but chuckle. Land agents have a way of stretching the truth, but he wasn't entirely wrong. The foundation's solid and the well is still good from what I can tell. It just needs considerable work. They crested a small rise, and the Wilkins homestead came into view in the valley below. From a distance, it looked almost picturesque, a small log cabin with a stone chimney, surrounded by a few outbuildings and the remnants of what had once been a vegetable garden. But as they drew closer, the deterioration became apparent. The roof had indeed collapsed on one side, leaving the interior exposed to the elements. Several windows were broken, and the front porch sagged dangerously. The outbuildings were in even worse shape, with one shed leaning so precariously it seemed a strong breeze might topple it. Sophia's dismay was palpable as Zach helped her down from Chester. She stood in what had once been the front yard, staring at the homestead with an expression that shifted rapidly from disappointment to determination. "Well," she said after a long moment, "it seems I have my work cut out for me." Zach tied Chester to a nearby post and followed her as she approached the cabin cautiously. "Miss Landry, with all due respect, this isn't a job for a woman alone. It would take a crew of men weeks to make this place habitable." She shot him a look that could have frozen water. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Jericho, and I didn't come all this way to turn back at the first sign of difficulty." Before he could respond, she marched toward the cabin's tilted front door. Zach hurried after her, concerned about structural instability. "At least let me check it first," he insisted, moving ahead to push open the door. The interior was as bad as he'd expected. Rain and snow had ruined most of the wooden floor on the north side. Debris littered what remained, and there was evidence that various animals had made their homes inside. But the stone fireplace still looked solid, and the southern portion of the cabin, while dusty and neglected, had been somewhat protected by the remaining roof. Sophia walked in slowly, her boots crunching on fallen bits of wood and plaster. She made a complete circuit of the main room, examining everything with a critical eye. "It's worse than I expected," she admitted finally, "but not impossible." Zach leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You'd need to completely replace the roof, rebuild the north wall, replace the flooring, and that's just to start. Winter comes early up here, Miss Landry. You've got perhaps 3 months before the first snow, and that's if you're lucky." She turned to face him, hands on her hips. "Are you trying to discourage me, Mr. Jericho? I'm trying to give you an honest assessment, something your land agent clearly failed to do." Her expression softened slightly. "And I appreciate that honesty, truly. But I've made my decision. I've paid for this land, and I intend to make it work." Zach shook his head, both impressed and exasperated by her stubbornness. "At least consider staying in town until repairs can be made. The hotel is expensive, and I have limited funds," she interrupted. "Every day I stay there is money I can't spend on repairs or supplies for the school." "Then what exactly is your plan?" She gestured to a relatively intact corner of the cabin. "I can make this section weathertight fairly quickly. It's small, but sufficient until I can afford more extensive repairs." Zach ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Miss Landry, even making that small section habitable would require skills I doubt you possess. No offense intended." "Then perhaps I need to hire someone with those skills," she replied, fixing him with a direct look. "Would you be interested in such employment, Mr. Jericho?" The question caught him off guard. "Me? You clearly know construction, you're familiar with the property, and your own land borders mine, making it convenient. I can't offer much in the way of payment immediately, but perhaps we could arrange a trade of some sort." Zach was about to refuse outright. He had his own place to maintain, cattle to tend, and no desire to take on someone else's problems. But something in her determined expression stopped him. "What kind of trade did you have in mind?" he asked cautiously. "I noticed your horse needs new shoes," she said, glancing out the broken window toward Chester. "I may not know construction, but I do know bookkeeping. I could help you organize your ranch accounts, write correspondence if needed. And once the school is operational, I could provide free education for any children you might have." "I don't have children," he said automatically. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Of course. I didn't mean to presume, but the offer stands for accounting services." Zach considered her proposal, knowing he should walk away. Getting involved with Miss Sophia Landry and her impossible project would only complicate his already complicated life, especially with someone potentially gunning for him. Yet he found himself oddly reluctant to leave her to face this challenge alone. "Let me show you something," he said finally, gesturing for her to follow him outside. He led her around to the back of the cabin where a small creek ran through the property. Despite the dilapidated state of the buildings, the land itself was beautiful rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, the creek providing a constant source of fresh water, and beyond, the mountains rose majestically against the sky. "This is good land," Zach said quietly. "Rich soil in that valley over there, perfect for crops, plenty of water, good grazing for livestock. The Wilkins would have done well if they'd stuck it out." Sophia stood beside him, taking in the view. "It's beautiful," she agreed. "I can see why they chose it, why you chose your land nearby." He turned to face her. "I'll help you with the most essential repairs enough to make part of the cabin habitable before winter. In exchange, you can help me with correspondence. I've been meaning to write to my sister back east, but I've never had a way with words." Her face lit up with a smile so genuine it took him aback. "Thank you, Mr. Jericho, I accept. Call me Zach," he said, surprising himself. "If we're going to be working together, then you must call me Sophia." She extended her hand and he took it, struck by how small it felt in his own work-roughened grasp, yet how firm her handshake was. As they rode back to Rawlins, with Sophia sitting more comfortably before him now, Zach wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He had his own roof to fix, after all, and now he'd committed to repairing someone else's. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. Whether that was a good thing remained to be seen. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Sophia purchased a gentle mare from the livery stable in Rawlins, a dappled gray she named Athena. Zach helped her compile a list of necessary supplies and tools, and together they arranged for delivery of lumber, shingles, nails, and other building materials to her property. While waiting for the deliveries, Zach showed her around the land, pointing out the best spots for a garden where the previous owners had kept their livestock, and identifying the wild plants that were safe to eat. Sophia absorbed it all with keen interest, taking notes in a small journal she kept in her pocket. They established a routine quickly. Each morning, Zach would finish his own chores at his ranch, then ride over to the Wilkins now Landry property. Sophia would already be there, having ridden out at dawn, usually attempting some task that was well beyond her capabilities, but tackling it with determined enthusiasm nonetheless. A week into their arrangement, Zach arrived to find her trying to move a fallen beam that had to weigh 3 times what she did. She had fashioned a makeshift lever system using smaller pieces of wood, but was making little progress. "You're going to hurt yourself," he called as he dismounted. She looked up, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. She'd taken to wearing trousers while working, claiming her dresses were impractical for construction. The men's clothing she'd somehow acquired hung loosely on her frame, secured with a belt around her narrow waist. Her honey-colored hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her face was smudged with dirt. "I nearly had it," she protested. Though they both knew that wasn't true, Zach shook his head and moved to help her, easily lifting the beam and carrying it outside to the growing pile of debris. When he returned, she was studying the now cleared area with a critical eye. "I think we should focus on this section first," she said, gesturing to the southern corner of the cabin. "The roof is mostly intact here and the floor is solid. If we wall it off from the damaged portion, it could serve as temporary living quarters." Zach had to admit it was a sensible plan. "We'll need to check the roof carefully," he said, looking up at the ceiling. "Even where it looks intact, there might be leaks." "Speaking of leaks," Sophia said casually, "I couldn't help but notice your own roof when I rode past your place yesterday. It seems to be in need of attention as well." Zach's expression closed off slightly. "My roof is fine." "There's a hole near the chimney large enough for a raccoon to enter," she pointed out. "I've lived with it for this long. It can wait." She looked like she wanted to argue but instead changed the subject. "The lumber should arrive today. Mr. Jenkins said they'd deliver it by wagon around noon." True to his word, Jenkins's delivery wagon appeared just after midday, laden with building supplies. The driver, a young man named Tommy, helped them unload everything near the cabin. "Miss Landry," Tommy said as they finished, "my ma wanted me to ask if you've set a date for starting school yet. She's got 4 little ones she's keen to see educated." Sophia's face lit up. "Please tell your mother that I hope to begin classes by September, assuming the repairs go well, and I'd be delighted to meet her children beforehand." After Tommy left, Zach and Sophia spent the remainder of the day sorting materials and finalizing their repair plan. They decided to start by securing the roof over the southern portion of the cabin, then constructing an interior wall to section off the habitable area from the damaged northern side. As the sun began to set, Casting long shadows across the property, Zach realized they'd been working for nearly 12 hours. Sophia looked exhausted but satisfied with their progress. "You should head back to town," he said, packing up the tools. "It'll be dark soon." She glanced toward the road, then back at the cabin. "Actually, I've been thinking. The hotel is expensive, as I mentioned. Now that we have the materials, I was considering setting up camp here, just until we make the cabin habitable." Zach frowned. "That's not safe." "You'd be completely alone out here." "I have a pistol," she replied. "My father insisted I learn to shoot before I left Boston." "A pistol won't keep you warm at night or dry when it rains." He hesitated, then added, "There's another option. You could stay at my place." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Not like that," he added quickly. "I meant I have a spare room. It's small, just an alcove really, but it has a bed. It would save you money and be safer than camping alone." Sophia considered his offer, obviously weighing propriety against practicality. "People in town might talk," she said finally. Zach shrugged. "People always talk. Question is whether you care what they say," she smiled faintly. "I've never been overly concerned with gossip, but I wouldn't want to damage my reputation as a teacher before I even begin." "Fair point," he conceded. "The offer stands, regardless. In the meantime, at least let me escort you back to town." They rode together to Rawlins, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of orange and gold. Zach found himself enjoying these quiet rides with Sophia. She was intelligent and observant, pointing out things he'd long since stopped noticing: the particular color of the evening sky, the way wildflowers dotted the prairie, the calls of birds returning to their nests. At the hotel, he helped her dismount, his hands lingering perhaps a moment too long at her waist. She looked up at him, her blue eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Thank you for your help today," she said, "and for the offer of lodging, I'll consider it." "Good, I'll see you tomorrow then." As he rode home alone, Zach found himself in an unusually reflective mood. It had been a long time since he'd spent so much time in anyone's company, let alone a woman's. He'd almost forgotten what it was like to have conversations that weren't about cattle prices or weather forecasts. Sophia challenged him, questioned his assumptions, and somehow made the hard work feel less tedious. When he reached his cabin, the contrast between it and Sophia's property struck him anew. His home, while structurally sound, was neglected. The leaking roof, the broken porch step he kept meaning to fix, the shutters hanging askew on one window, all evidence of his solitary existence. He'd stopped caring about these things because there was no one else to care. Inside, the collection of pots and buckets still sat where he'd placed them, catching drips from the roof. With a sudden decision, Zach moved to the shed behind the cabin and retrieved his tools. By the light of the moon and a lantern, he began clearing debris from around the chimney, preparing to repair the roof that had leaked for far too long. The next morning, Sophia arrived at Zach's property earlier than expected, just as the sun was cresting the horizon. She found him already on the roof, hammering new shingles into place. "Well, this is a surprise," she called up to him, dismounting from Athena. "I thought you said your roof could wait." Zach looked down, momentarily pausing his work. "Figured I might as well fix it while I'm in the business of roof repair." She smiled knowingly but didn't press the issue. "Need any help?" "Not with this, but there's coffee inside if you want some. Just made a fresh pot." Sophia tied Athena to the hitching post and went inside Zach's cabin. It was her first time seeing his home, and she took in the sparse but tidy interior with interest. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace similar to the one at her property. A curtained alcove at the back must be the spare room he'd mentioned. His own bed sat against the wall beneath the newly repaired section of roof, the pots and buckets now empty and stacked beside it. She found the coffee pot on the stove and poured herself a cup, then ventured back outside to watch Zach work. He moved with confidence across the roof, his movements efficient and practiced. She couldn't help but admire the strength in his shoulders as he drove nails into the wooden shingles. "You're good at this," she observed when he climbed down to fetch more materials. He shrugged, taking a drink from the cup of coffee she offered him. "Necessary skill out here. Can't always rely on others to fix things for you. Yet you let your own roof go unrepaired for how long?" Zach gave her a sharp look. "Didn't seem important at the time. And now it does." She pressed, genuinely curious about the change. He hesitated, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Let's just say I was reminded that some things are worth maintaining even if it's just for yourself." They rode to Sophia's property together once Zach had finished the critical repairs on his roof. The day was already growing hot, promising another scorcher typical of Wyoming summers. They worked side by side, Zach showing Sophia how to measure and cut lumber for the interior wall they planned to build. "You're a quick study," he commented as she successfully sawed through a board along the line he'd marked. "I've always believed in learning by doing," she replied, wiping sawdust from her hands. "Though I admit this is quite different from teaching grammar to Boston schoolchildren." "I imagine so. How did you end up teaching in the first place?" Sophia paused, leaning against the workbench they'd set up outside. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She instilled in me a love of learning from an early age. After she passed away when I was 16, I felt drawn to follow in her footsteps." "I'm sorry about your mother," Zach said quietly. She nodded in acknowledgement. "It was difficult. My father is a banker, very practical-minded. He wanted me to make a suitable marriage rather than pursue a career, but eventually he accepted my choice. He wasn't pleased about my decision to come west, however." "I can understand his concern," Zach said, selecting another board to cut. "It's not an easy life out here, especially for someone used to city comforts." "I'm tougher than I look," Sophia said, a phrase Zach had heard her use several times now. "And I wanted something more than what Boston could offer, a chance to build something meaningful to make a real difference. And you think you can do that here in Rawlins?" "I know I can," she said with conviction. "These children deserve an education just as much as any child in Boston, more perhaps because they have fewer opportunities." Zach studied her for a moment, struck again by her determination. "Your students will be fortunate to have you as their teacher." Her smile was warm and genuine, and he found himself smiling back almost involuntarily. They worked through the day, making good progress on framing the interior wall that would separate the habitable portion of the cabin from the damaged section. By late afternoon, they were both sweaty and exhausted but satisfied with what they'd accomplished. "Another few days like this and you might actually have a roof over your head," Zach said as they packed up the tools. "Thanks to your help," Sophia acknowledged. She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about your offer of staying at your place while we complete the repairs." Zach kept his expression neutral, trying to ignore the unexpected leap in his chest. "And I've decided to accept if it's still available. The hotel expenses are adding up, and it would be much more practical to be closer to the work site." "It's still available," he confirmed. "We can collect your things from the hotel on our way back." They rode to town together, Zach waiting outside while Sophia gathered her belongings from her room. The hotel proprietor, Mrs. Bennett, gave them a curious look as Sophia checked out but made no comment beyond wishing her well. The sun was setting as they approached Zach's cabin, casting long shadows across the property. Sophia's few possessions, 2 small trunks and a carpetbag, were loaded on Athena behind her saddle. As they dismounted and carried her things inside, Zach felt suddenly self-conscious about his modest home. "It's not much," he said as he showed her to the curtained alcove, "but it's dry now." Sophia set down her carpetbag and smiled. "It's perfect, thank you." That evening they shared a simple meal of venison stew that Zach had prepared before riding out that morning. Sitting across from each other at his small table, Zach was struck by how quickly Sophia had inserted herself into his solitary existence. Just 2 weeks ago, he'd been eating alone as he had for years. Now here she was, bringing a presence to his cabin that somehow made it feel more like a home than it ever had before. So, Sophia said, breaking into his thoughts, you mentioned writing to your sister. Is she your only family? Zach nodded, taking a sip of coffee. Younger sister, Rebecca. She lives in St. Louis with her husband and 3 children. I haven't seen her in nearly 5 years, though we exchange letters occasionally. And your parents? Both gone. Father died in the war, mother passed a few years after from consumption. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly. It must be difficult being so far from your remaining family, Zach shrugged. Been on my own since I was 20, you get used to it. Do you? She asked, her blue eyes searching his face. Get used to it, I mean. The question caught him off guard with its perceptiveness. I suppose you find ways to fill the silence, he admitted. Work helps. There's always something that needs doing on a ranch. But is that enough? She pressed gently. Just work and silence? Zach was saved from answering by a sudden commotion outside the sound of approaching horses. He rose quickly, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. Stay here, he told Sophia, moving to the window to peer outside. 3 riders were approaching his cabin, their forms dark against the twilight sky. Zach recognized them as they drew closer. Ryan Blackwell and his 2 brothers from the neighboring ranch to the north. They had a long-standing dispute over water rights that had nearly come to blows on several occasions. Trouble? Sophia asked, coming to stand beside him despite his instruction to stay put. Neighbors, Zach replied tersely, not the friendly kind. He stepped outside onto the porch as the Blackwells reined in their horses in front of the cabin. Ryan, the eldest, was a barrel-chested man with a perpetual sneer beneath his thick mustache. His brothers flanked him, hands resting meaningfully on their sidearms. Jericho, Ryan called out, got something that belongs to you. He held up a ragged piece of cloth that Zach recognized as one of his bandanas. Found this tangled in our fence line along with 3 of our calves with your brand on them. Zach's jaw tightened. That's impossible. All my cattle are accounted for, calling me a liar. Ryan's hand moved closer to his pistol. Before Zach could respond, Sophia stepped onto the porch beside him. The Blackwell brothers exchanged surprised glances at the sight of her. Evening, gentlemen, she said calmly. Is there a problem? Ryan recovered quickly, removing his hat in a mockery of politeness. No problem that concerns you, madam, just a matter between neighbors. Actually, Sophia said, moving to stand slightly in front of Zach, much to his dismay, as a resident of this property, I believe it does concern me. And I must say, approaching someone's home armed at dusk, making accusations without proof seems less like neighborly discussion and more like intimidation. The youngest Blackwell brother snickered, but Ryan's face darkened. You've got yourself a feisty one, Jericho. Didn't know you had it in you. Miss Landry is my neighbor, Zach said firmly, moving Sophia behind him with a gentle but insistent hand. She's staying here temporarily while repairs are made to her property, the old Wilkins place. Is that what they're calling it these days? Ryan smirked. Zach took a step forward, his patience wearing thin. Say what you came to say, Blackwell, then get off my land. Ryan held up the bandana again. Like I said, found your calves on our property. That's rustling where I come from. And like I said, that's impossible. I don't know how my bandana got on your land, but my cattle are all accounted for. If you've got animals with my brand, I suggest you check your own handiwork. The accusation hung in the air between them. It was well known that the Blackwells had been accused of altering brands before, though nothing had ever been proven. Ryan's face contorted with anger. You calling us rustlers, Jericho? I'm saying check your facts before you come making accusations on my property. For a tense moment, Zach thought Ryan might draw his weapon. Instead, the older man spat into the dirt and stuffed the bandana into his pocket. This isn't over, he warned, then wheeled his horse around. His brothers followed suit, and the 3 men galloped away into the gathering darkness. Zach waited until they were out of sight before turning to Sophia, who stood watching with a mixture of concern and curiosity. I'm sorry you had to witness that, he said, ushering her back inside. Who were they? She asked as he closed the door firmly behind them. The Blackwell brothers. own the large ranch north of here. We've had disagreements over the years. About cattle, about water rights primarily. There's a creek that runs between our properties. They claim exclusive rights to it, but the law says otherwise. Zach moved to the stove, pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee, though he didn't particularly want it. He needed something to do with his hands. "You think they were responsible for shooting at you?" Sophia asked, surprising him. "You mentioned someone took a shot at you the day we met." Zach turned to her sharply. "How did you know about that? Mr. Jenkins mentioned it when I was asking about you. He seemed to think it might have been the Blackwells, though he wasn't certain." "Jenkins talks too much," Zach muttered. "But yes, it's possible, though there's no proof." Sophia sat at the table, her expression thoughtful. "It seems you've made some enemies. Comes with the territory out here. Land and water are valuable, people will fight for them. Even to the point of murder." Zach set down his cup, meeting her gaze directly. "Sometimes. Which is why you should be careful about the company you keep. Being associated with me might not be in your best interest." "I believe I can decide that for myself," she replied firmly. "And I'm not easily intimidated, Mr. Jericho. So I've noticed," he said dryly. The tension from the confrontation gradually dissipated as they settled back into their evening routine. Sophia produced a book from her carpetbag, a volume of Emerson's essays, and read by lamplight while Zach cleaned his pistol at the table. The domesticity of the scene struck him as both foreign and surprisingly comfortable. Later, as they prepared to retire for the night, Sophia paused at the curtain to her alcove. "Do you think they'll come back?" "Not tonight," Zach assured her, "but I'll keep watch just in case." She nodded, then surprised him by saying, "Thank you for protecting me, though I was perfectly prepared to handle those men myself." Zach couldn't help but smile. "I don't doubt that for a minute, Miss Landry, but some battles aren't yours to fight." "Perhaps," she conceded. "But I've never been good at standing by when injustice is occurring. Good night, Zach." "Good night, Sophia." As promised, Zach kept watch for a time, sitting in a chair by the window with his rifle across his lap. But the night remained peaceful, and eventually he retired to his bed, lulled to sleep by the unfamiliar but comforting sound of another person's gentle breathing nearby. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Each day they would rise early, tend to the necessary chores around Zach's ranch, then ride to Sophia's property to continue repairs. They made steady progress, first completing the interior wall that sectioned off the habitable portion of the cabin, then replacing the damaged floorboards, and finally beginning work on rebuilding the collapsed section of roof. Sophia proved to be a determined and capable assistant, quickly learning basic carpentry skills and taking on increasingly complex tasks. Zach found himself impressed by her willingness to tackle any challenge, no matter how daunting. In the evenings, they would return to Zach's cabin, tired but satisfied with their day's work. They took turns cooking meals, though Zach quickly discovered that Sophia's culinary abilities were limited. Her first attempt at biscuits had been so hard they'd joked about using them as building materials. But she improved with practice, just as she did with everything she set her mind to. After dinner, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking. Zach discovered that Sophia was well-read and had strong opinions on everything from politics to literature. Their discussions sometimes turned into friendly debates, with Sophia challenging his more traditional viewpoints and Zach questioning her idealistic perspectives. "You really believe one small school can make a difference out here?" he asked one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge. "I do," she said without hesitation. "Education is the foundation of progress. These children, especially the girls, need to know there's a world beyond ranching and mining. They deserve choices. Even if those choices take them away from here, you'd be training them to leave." Sophia considered this. "Some might leave, yes. But others will stay and apply what they've learned to improve this community. Knowledge never diminishes a place, it only enhances it." "That's a pretty thought," Zach said, but I've seen what happens to small towns when the young folks leave for opportunities elsewhere. They dry up and blow away. Then perhaps the solution is to create more opportunities here, she countered. But that starts with education. Children who can read, write, and calculate are better equipped to build businesses, manage farms effectively, or even bring new industries to Rawlins. Zach had to admit she had a point. You make a compelling argument, schoolteacher, she smiled, pleased. It's what I do best. As the days passed, Zach found himself increasingly drawn to Sophia's company. He admired her intelligence and determination, but it was her kindness that affected him most deeply. She treated everyone with respect, from the wealthiest merchant in town to the Chinese laundry worker whom others ignored. She seemed genuinely interested in people's stories, their struggles and triumphs. One Saturday, about a month after Sophia had moved into his spare room, they took a break from construction to attend the town's monthly market day. Farmers and craftspeople from the surrounding area gathered in Rawlins to sell their goods, and it was an opportunity for Sophia to meet more of the local families. As they walked among the stalls, Sophia was approached repeatedly by mothers eager to introduce their children to the new teacher. She greeted each one warmly, kneeling to speak with the children at eye level and asking them about their interests. "Miss Landry," a woman called, approaching with two young girls in tow, "I'm Martha Wilson. My husband works at the railroad office. These are my daughters, Emma and Jane." "It's wonderful to meet you all," Sophia said, smiling at the girls who stared at her with wide, curious eyes. "Are you excited about starting school this fall?" The older girl, about 10, nodded eagerly while the younger one hid partially behind her mother's skirts. "They both are," Martha assured her. "It's been hard keeping up with their lessons at home, what with the baby and all my other duties. We're so grateful you've come to Rawlins." "I'm happy to be here," Sophia replied, "and I promise we'll make learning an adventure." As they continued through the market, Zach hung back, watching these interactions with interest. He realized that Sophia was already becoming an important part of the community, forming connections that would help her school succeed. They stopped at Jenkins's stall to purchase coffee and flour. The storekeeper greeted them with a knowing smile that made Zach uncomfortable. "Miss Landry, Mr. Jericho," Jenkins said, "you two have been busy, I hear. The Wilkins place is coming along nicely, according to Tommy, who delivered those additional shingles last week." "It is," Sophia confirmed, "though there's still much to do before it's properly habitable." "And in the meantime, you're staying at Mr. Jericho's cabin," Jenkins said, his tone deliberately casual but his eyes sharp with curiosity. Zach tensed, but Sophia didn't flinch. "Yes, Mr. Jericho has been kind enough to offer his spare room while the repairs are underway. It's been a tremendous help, both practically and financially." Jenkins nodded, but Zach could see the speculation in his eyes. He'd undoubtedly been fueling the town gossip about their living arrangement. As they walked away with their purchases, Zach murmured, "People are talking." Sophia shrugged. "Let them, we know the truth." "It could affect your standing as a teacher," he pointed out. "If parents are more concerned with unfounded gossip than their children's education, that's their loss," she replied, though her expression betrayed a flicker of worry. "Besides, once my cabin is habitable, the talk will die down. And when will that be?" Zach asked, surprising himself with the question. He hadn't considered that he might miss her presence when she moved to her own place. "Soon, I hope," she said. "Though I admit your coffee is better than what I make." He smiled at that, relieved she hadn't detected the unexpected emotion behind his question. Their work on Sophia's cabin continued at a steady pace. By mid-August, they had repaired most of the roof, replaced the broken windows, and reinforced the damaged walls. The interior was still rough, with only the sectioned-off portion truly habitable, but it was progress. One afternoon, as they were installing the last of the new windows, a wagon approached the property. Zach recognized it as belonging to Bill Mason, the freight driver who had refused to take Sophia to her property that first day. "Afternoon, Miss Landry, Jericho," Mason called as he pulled his team to a halt. "Got a delivery for you from the train station." Sophia looked surprised. "I wasn't expecting anything." Mason consulted a piece of paper. "Says here it's from Boston, a Mr. Charles Landry." "My father," Sophia explained, moving toward the wagon. "I wrote to him about the school." Mason and Zach unloaded several large crates from the wagon. They were heavy, and Sophia's excitement grew as she examined the shipping labels. "Books," she exclaimed, "and, oh, a school bell and slates for the students. He sent everything I asked for and more." Her joy was infectious, and Zach found himself smiling as she directed them to carry the crates into the cabin. Once Mason had departed, she began opening the boxes, revealing dozens of carefully packed books, writing materials, maps, and even a small brass bell. "Look at this," she said, holding up a beautiful illustrated atlas. "The children will be able to see the whole world without leaving Rollins." Zach watched as she reverently arranged the books on a shelf they'd built the previous week. Her face was alight with enthusiasm, and he felt a surge of admiration for her dedication. This wasn't just a job for her, it was a calling, a purpose that drove her every action. "Your father must support your venture, despite his concerns," he observed. Sophia nodded, carefully unpacking a set of primer readers. "He doesn't understand my choice to come west, but he respects it. And he's always believed in education, even if he thinks Boston offers better opportunities for it." "He's not wrong about the opportunities," Zach said, helping her arrange the larger maps against the wall. "Life is harder here." "Harder in some ways," she agreed, "but there's a freedom here that Boston lacks, a sense that you can build something new, something that matters." As they worked together to organize the school supplies, Zach found himself imagining what it would be like when Sophia's school was operational. Children filling this space with their voices, learning to read and write under her guidance. He could picture her moving among them, patient and encouraging, just as she'd been with the children at the market. That evening, their conversation turned to the timeline for completing the remaining repairs. The sectioned-off portion of Sophia's cabin was now weathertight and had basic furnishings: a bed, a table, chairs, and the bookshelves they just filled. "I think I could move in by the end of the week," Sophia said as they rode back to Zach's ranch. "The rest of the repairs can be done gradually, and I'd like to focus on preparing for the school opening." Zach nodded, ignoring the unexpected twinge of disappointment her words caused. "Makes sense. The essential work is done. You've got a solid roof, secure walls, and working doors and windows." "Thanks to your help," she added. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You'd have found a way," he said, knowing it was true. Sophia Landry was nothing if not resourceful. That night, as Zach lay in his bed listening to the familiar sound of Sophia's breathing from behind the curtained alcove, he confronted the realization that had been growing within him for weeks. He would miss her when she moved to her own cabin. The thought of returning to his solitary existence after these weeks of companionship and conversation left him feeling hollow. It wasn't just her physical presence he would miss, but everything she brought with her: the lively discussions, the shared meals, the way she challenged him to think beyond his isolated life on the ranch. She had awakened something in him that he'd thought long dormant: a desire for connection, for more than mere survival. The next few days passed too quickly. They transported Sophia's belongings to her cabin, set up her small kitchen, and made final adjustments to ensure everything was functioning properly. Zach found himself inventing reasons to prolong the work, suggesting additional improvements that weren't strictly necessary. But Sophia seemed eager to establish herself in her own space. On the day she was to officially move in, they rode together from his ranch to her property, carrying the last of her possessions. The cabin looked welcoming now, with curtains on the windows and a small garden already started beside the front door. "It's hard to believe this is the same place we first saw 2 months ago," Sophia said as they approached. "It was nearly a ruin then." "You've worked miracles," Zach agreed, helping her dismount. Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. The sectioned-off living area was cozy and functional, with Sophia's personal touches evident in the arrangement of books, the colorful quilt on the bed, and the dried wildflowers in a jar on the table. Beyond the interior wall they'd built, the larger portion of the cabin was still under construction, but it was clean and organized, ready to become her schoolroom. They spent the day arranging the last of her belongings and reviewing the remaining work to be done. As evening approached, Zach found himself reluctant to leave, inventing small tasks to keep him there a little longer. Finally, as the sun began to set, he knew he could delay no longer. "I should be heading back," he said, standing awkwardly by the door. Sophia walked him outside to where Chester was hitched. "Thank you again for everything," she said. "I would never have accomplished all this without your help." "You've done as much for me," he replied honestly. "Having someone to talk to, it's been good." She smiled up at him, her blue eyes catching the light of the setting sun. "You're welcome to visit anytime. I mean that, Zach. I'll hold you to it," he said, mounting Chester. "And we still have work to do on the schoolroom." "Yes, we do," she agreed. "I'll see you tomorrow." He nodded, tipping his hat to her before turning Chester toward home. As he rode away, he glanced back once to see her standing in front of her cabin, silhouetted against the warm glow of light from within. Something shifted in his chest, a mixture of pride in what they'd accomplished, and a strange sort of longing he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The next few weeks brought changes to their routine. Zach still rode to Sophia's property most days to help with the remaining repairs to what would become the schoolroom, but their interactions felt different now. More formal in some ways, as if the easy intimacy they'd developed while sharing his cabin had been replaced by a more cautious friendship. Sophia was busy preparing for the school's opening, scheduled for the first Monday in September. She met with parents, organized her teaching materials, and worked with Zach to construct simple benches and desks for her students. One afternoon, as they were setting up the last of the student desks, Sophia mentioned casually, "I've invited some of the families to a small gathering here on Sunday. A chance for the children to see the school before classes begin, and for parents to ask any questions they might have. I was hoping you would attend." Zach looked up from the desk he was securing to the floor. "Me? Why?" "Because you've been instrumental in making this school possible," she said, "and because, well, I'd like you to be there." The simple honesty of her statement caught him off guard. "Then I'll be there," he promised. Sunday arrived clear and warm, a perfect late summer day. Zach spent more time than usual getting ready, putting on his least worn shirt and even trimming his beard neatly. He felt oddly nervous as he rode to Sophia's property, where several wagons and horses were already gathered outside the cabin. Inside, the schoolroom was transformed. The construction debris had been cleared away, the new desks arranged in neat rows, and colorful maps hung on the freshly whitewashed walls. A dozen or so children were exploring the space under the watchful eyes of their parents, while Sophia moved among them, answering questions and showing off the books and learning materials. She spotted Zach in the doorway and crossed the room to greet him, looking radiant in a blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly. Her honey-colored hair was arranged more elegantly than he'd seen it before, with small white flowers woven into the braids. "You came," she said, smiling up at him. "I said I would," he replied, suddenly aware of the curious glances from the assembled parents. Sophia took his arm and led him into the room. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Mr. Zachariah Jericho. Without his expertise and hard work, this school would not be ready to open tomorrow." There were nods of acknowledgement and a few friendly greetings. Zach recognized most of the faces: ranchers, shopkeepers, and railroad workers from town, along with their wives and children. To his surprise, they seemed genuinely appreciative of his contribution. The gathering was pleasant, with refreshments served and the children increasingly excited about beginning their studies. Zach found himself drawn into conversations about the construction work, explaining to interested parents how they had transformed the damaged cabin into a functional schoolhouse. As the afternoon progressed, he noticed Sophia watching him with a smile as he showed a group of boys how the new roof had been constructed. There was something in her expression he couldn't quite decipher, but it made his heart beat a little faster. The families began to depart as evening approached, with promises to return bright and early the next morning for the first day of school. Soon only Zach and Sophia remained, standing together in the now quiet schoolroom. "It's really happening," Sophia said, her voice soft with wonder as she looked around the room. "Tomorrow, this place will be filled with children learning." "Thanks to you," Zach said. "Your determination made this possible, Sophia. I just hammered a few nails." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "It was far more than that, and you know it. You believed in this project when you had every reason to think it was foolish. You offered your home when I needed shelter. You taught me skills I never thought I'd master." She paused, then added quietly, "You've been my friend when I most needed one. Friend." The word felt both right and somehow insufficient for what had grown between them. Zach cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to meet her gaze. "It's been my pleasure," he said simply. "And I'm glad to see it all coming together for you." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things neither seemed ready to say. Finally, Sophia moved toward the door. "Would you like to stay for supper? It's the least I can offer after all your help." "I'd like that," Zach said, relieved by the shift to more familiar territory. They prepared the meal together in Sophia's small kitchen, moving around each other with the easy coordination that comes from weeks of shared tasks. As they ate, they discussed the final preparations for the school's opening and Sophia's plans for her first lessons. Night had fallen by the time they finished, and Zach knew he should leave. But as he stood on her porch preparing to depart, he found himself reluctant to go. "I should wish you luck for tomorrow," he said, "but you don't need it. You're going to be a wonderful teacher, Sophia." "Thank you," she replied, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp from inside. "Will I see you afterward to tell you how it went?" "I'd like that," he said. "I could stop by in the afternoon once the students have gone home." She nodded, and for a moment they stood looking at each other in the darkness. Zach felt drawn to her, wanting to step closer to touch her face, to tell her how much these past weeks had meant to him. But he held himself back, uncertain of her feelings and wary of complicating her position in the community. "Good night, Sophia," he said finally, stepping back. "Good night, Zach," she replied softly. As he rode home through the moonlit landscape, Zach found himself thinking about the changes Sophia had brought to his life. Before her arrival, he'd been existing rather than living, going through the motions of survival without any real purpose beyond making it to the next day. Now, he found himself looking forward to each morning, eager to see what challenges and conversations the day would bring. He thought about his cabin, how he'd finally repaired the roof that had leaked for years, how he'd fixed the broken porch step and the askew shutters. Small improvements, but significant. He'd done them initially because Sophia would see them, but he'd continued even after she moved to her own place. Because somehow she had made him care again about his home, about his future, and most surprisingly, about himself. The next day, true to his word, Zach rode to Sophia's cabin in the late afternoon. As he approached, he could see the last of her students departing, small figures walking or riding alongside parents who had come to collect them. Sophia stood on the porch, waving goodbye to each child by name. When she spotted Zach, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. She looked tired but exhilarated, her hair slightly disheveled and chalk dust on her blue dress. "How was it?" he asked as he dismounted. "Wonderful," she said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Chaotic and challenging and absolutely wonderful. 15 students, Zach, more than I expected. Ages 6 to 14, all eager to learn." Her joy was infectious, and he found himself smiling in response. "Tell me everything," he said, following her inside. The schoolroom showed evidence of the day's activities writing on the blackboard, papers on the teacher's desk, a map pulled down from its roller. Sophia moved around the space as she talked, straightening chairs and gathering abandoned pencils, describing each student and their first lessons with animated detail. Zach watched her, captivated by her passion. This was where she belonged, he realized. This was her purpose, her calling. And watching her fulfill it was a privilege he hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, pausing in her narrative. "I've been talking non-stop. You must be bored." "Not at all," he assured her honestly. "I like seeing you so happy." Their eyes met across the room and something shifted in the air between them. Sophia set down the book she'd been organizing and moved closer to where Zach stood by the door. "I am happy," she said softly. "Happier than I expected to be in Rollins, and it's not just the school, Zach." His heart beat faster at her words, at the way she was looking at him now. "No," she shook her head, taking another step toward him. "No, it's everything, the place, the community, and you." Zach swallowed hard, uncertain how to respond. "Sophia," a sudden crack of gunfire interrupted him, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Without thinking, Zach lunged forward, pulling Sophia to the ground and covering her body with his own as another shot rang out. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice harsh with fear. "No," she gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "What's happening?" "Someone's shooting at the cabin," Zach said grimly, already calculating their position relative to the windows. "We need to get to cover." Still keeping low, he helped her crawl behind the solid wooden teacher's desk. From there, he could see that one of the new windows had been shattered, glass littering the floor beneath it. "Stay here," he instructed, drawing his pistol. "Don't move until I come back for you." "Zach, no," she protested, grabbing his arm. "You can't go out there." "I need to see who's doing this," he insisted, gently but firmly removing her hand. "I'll be careful." Before she could argue further, he moved in a crouch toward the back door of the cabin. Once outside, he pressed himself against the wall, listening intently. The evening was eerily quiet now, with no sign of the shooter. Carefully, he made his way around the perimeter of the cabin, staying in the shadows and scanning the surrounding area. A movement caught his eye, a figure on horseback retreating rapidly toward the east. The distance was too great for accurate identification, but something about the rider's silhouette seemed familiar. The Blackwells. It was possible, given their previous threats. When he was certain the immediate danger had passed, Zach returned to Sophia, who remained behind the desk, pale but composed. "They're gone," he told her, holstering his pistol. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands trembled slightly as she stood. "Just shaken. Who would do this, Zach, and why?" He moved to examine the broken window, carefully avoiding the glass on the floor. "I'm not certain, but I have suspicions. The Blackwells have been making threats for weeks." "But why target the school?" Sophia asked, bewildered. "What could they possibly gain from frightening children and their teacher?" Zach's expression darkened. "It's not about the school, it's about me. They know I helped build this place. They know it matters to me." His words hung in the air between them, revealing more than he'd intended. Sophia's eyes widened slightly and she moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his arm. "Because I matter to you?" she asked softly. Zach turned to face her fully, knowing it was time for honesty. "Yes, more than I expected, more than I thought possible." Their eyes held for a long moment, and then Sophia stepped closer, her hand moving from his arm to rest against his chest. "You matter to me too, Zach. These past months, you've become so important to me." The confession seemed to release something within him. Zach reached out, gently touching her face, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her cheek. "Sophia, I never thought I'd find someone who would make me want more than solitude, but you've changed everything." She leaned into his touch, her blue eyes never leaving his. "Is that why you fixed your roof? Because you started wanting more?" He smiled, surprised by her perception. "Yes, because you made me see that some things are worth maintaining, worth fighting for." The distance between them closed, And then his lips found hers in a kiss that was both gentle and profound. Her arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, and Zach felt something inside him shift permanently, as if all the scattered pieces of his life were finally falling into their proper places. When they eventually parted, Sophia rested her forehead against his chest, and Zach held her close, his chin on top of her head. For a moment they stood in perfect stillness, savoring the new understanding between them. Then reality intruded as Zach remembered the shattered window and the shooter who had escaped. "You can't stay here tonight," he said. "It's not safe." Sophia looked up at him, concern replacing the warmth in her eyes. "You think they'll come back?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm not willing to take that risk. Not with you," she nodded, her practical nature asserting itself. "I'll need to inform the parents. If it's not safe for me, it's not safe for the children." "We'll deal with that tomorrow," Zach assured her. "For now, let's board up this window and get you somewhere secure." They worked quickly, nailing spare boards across the broken window to prevent further intrusion. Sophia gathered a few essentials into a bag while Zach checked the rest of the cabin for any other damage. As they rode together toward Zach's ranch, the moon rising above the mountains in the distance, Sophia leaned back against his chest. "What are we going to do, Zach? I can't let someone threaten the school." "We'll figure it out," he promised, his arm tightening protectively around her waist. "First thing tomorrow, I'll speak with Sheriff Taylor in town. If it was the Blackwells, there will be consequences. And if it wasn't, then we'll find out who it was," he said with determination. "I won't let anyone hurt you or your school, Sophia, that's a promise." She twisted slightly to look up at him, her face serious in the moonlight. "We'll face it together," she said. "Whatever comes." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of commitment that resonated deeply with Zach. Together. It was a concept he'd avoided for so long, convinced that solitude was safer, simpler. But now, with Sophia beside him, he couldn't imagine facing whatever came next alone. When they reached his cabin, the familiar sight of its solid walls and newly repaired roof filled him with a sense of homecoming he'd never fully experienced before. As he helped Sophia dismount, he realized that home wasn't just a place with a sound roof, it was wherever she was. Inside, the cabin seemed to welcome her back, as if the space had been waiting for her return. Zach lit the lamps while Sophia moved with easy familiarity to the stove to put on water for tea. "It feels strange," she said, turning to face him across the small room. "Being back here after these weeks away. Yet somehow it also feels right." Zach crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "It is right," he said simply. "You belong here, Sophia, with me if that's what you want." Her answer was in her eyes before she spoke it aloud. "It's what I want. It's what I've wanted for longer than I was ready to admit." He kissed her then, a kiss filled with promise and certainty. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now that he'd accepted the truth of them. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you stood in Jenkins's store examining fabric, looking so determined and out of place." Sophia laughed softly. "And I think I started falling in love with you the day you offered to show me the property no one else would take me to see. When you were honest about its condition, instead of letting me discover the truth alone." The kettle whistled, interrupting the moment. As they moved apart to prepare the tea, Zach felt a contentment he'd never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead the Blackwells, the school, building a life together, they would face them as one. The next morning, they rode into Rawlins together to speak with Sheriff Taylor. The lawman listened gravely to their account of the shooting, his weathered face creasing with concern. "This is serious business," he said when they'd finished. "Firing at a schoolhouse is beyond the pale, even for the Blackwells." "You're certain you didn't recognize the rider, Jericho?" "Not positively," Zach admitted. "But they've been making threats, and this fits their pattern of intimidation." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "I'll ride out to their place today, ask some questions. In the meantime, Miss Landry, I'd advise postponing school for a few days until we sort this out." Sophia looked distressed at the suggestion. The children have just begun their studies. I hate to interrupt their education. Better a brief interruption than a tragedy, the sheriff said firmly. I'll speak with the parents myself, explain the situation. Reluctantly, Sophia agreed. As they left the sheriff's office, they encountered Bill Mason loading supplies onto his freight wagon. Morning, Miss Landry, Jericho, Mason called. Heard about the trouble at the school last night. Whole town's talking about it. News travels fast, Zach observed dryly. Mason nodded, looking unusually serious. Folks are riled up about it. Shooting at a schoolteacher, it's crossing a line. The Blackwells have made themselves some enemies today. We don't know for certain it was them, Sophia pointed out. Don't need to know for certain, Mason replied. Most folks have had enough of their bullying tactics. This might be what finally pushes the town to take action. His words proved prophetic. Throughout the day, as Zach and Sophia made arrangements to secure the school and inform parents about the temporary closure, they were approached by concerned townspeople offering support and assistance. Several men volunteered to take turns standing guard at the school until the culprit was caught. Jenkins offered to donate glass for the broken window. Even Mrs. Bennett from the hotel insisted Sophia take a room free of charge if she needed it. By evening, when Sheriff Taylor returned from his visit to the Blackwell Ranch, a small crowd had gathered outside his office, eager for news. The Blackwells deny any involvement, Taylor reported to Zach and Sophia inside while keeping the crowd at bay. Claimed they were all at home last night. And you believe them? Zach asked skeptically. The sheriff shrugged. Can't say either way. They're convincing liars when they need to be. But I did notice something interesting. Ryan Blackwell's got a fresh wound on his arm. Says he caught it on a barbed wire fence, but it looked more like a bullet grazed to me. So it was them, Zach said grimly. Possibly, Taylor conceded. But without witnesses or more evidence, there's not much I can do officially. Sophia, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What if it wasn't the Blackwells? What if it was someone else entirely? Both men looked at her in surprise. Do you have another suspect in mind? The sheriff asked. Not specifically, she admitted. But it seems strange that someone would shoot at the school just to get at Zach. Why not target his ranch directly? It was a logical question that Zach hadn't considered. She's right, he said slowly. If their goal was to intimidate me, there are more direct approaches. Unless the school itself was the target, Sophia continued, her expression troubled. Perhaps someone doesn't want education coming to Rollins. Not everyone values progress. Sheriff Taylor stroked his mustache thoughtfully. It's possible, though I can't think who would go to such lengths to prevent children from learning their letters. Neither can I, Sophia sighed, but I refuse to be intimidated. The school will reopen as soon as it's safe to do so. In the meantime, Zach said, Sophia will be staying with me. We've decided. He glanced at her, seeking confirmation before continuing. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. We've decided to marry, Zach finished, the words sending a thrill through him even as he spoke them. Sheriff Taylor's eyebrows shot up, but he quickly composed his features into a smile. Well now, that's unexpected but not surprising. Congratulations to you both. Thank you, Sophia said, her hand finding Zach's. We haven't set a date yet, but we didn't want to hide our intentions, especially given the circumstances. As they left the sheriff's office, the waiting townspeople barraged them with questions about the investigation. Zach was about to deflect them when Sophia stepped forward, addressing the crowd with calm authority. Sheriff Taylor is doing everything possible to identify those responsible, she said. In the meantime, the school will remain closed for a few days as a precaution. I'll inform each family personally when classes will resume. There were murmurs of approval and nodding heads. These people trusted Sophia, Zach realized. In just a few short months, she had become an integral part of their community. Martha Wilson, the mother they'd met at the market, pushed forward through the crowd. Miss Landry, we parents have been talking. We want you to know that we stand behind you and your school. My husband and some other men are willing to take turns keeping watch to ensure nothing like this happens again." "That's very kind," Sophia replied, clearly moved. "Thank you." As they walked away from the gathering, heading toward the general store to purchase supplies, Zach felt a surge of pride. Sophia had created something valuable here, not just a school, but a sense of community purpose. And now that community was rallying to protect what she'd built. "You've made quite an impression on these people," he observed as they entered Jenkins's store. "They're willing to stand guard over an empty schoolhouse. They're protecting their children's future," Sophia corrected him. "The school represents opportunity for them." Jenkins looked up as they approached his counter, his expression unusually solemn. "Miss Landry, Mr. Jericho, terrible business this shooting, simply terrible." "Yes, it is," Sophia agreed, "but we're hopeful the culprit will be identified soon." "Indeed," Jenkins said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Between us, I heard something interesting this morning. Tommy was delivering supplies out near the Blackwell place yesterday afternoon, and he swears he saw Ryan and his youngest brother heading east around sunset." "East, mind you, in the direction of your school." Zach exchanged a look with Sophia. "Did Tommy mention this to the sheriff?" "Said he did just this morning," Jenkins confirmed. "Thought you should know." Armed with this new information, they completed their shopping quickly and headed back to the sheriff's office. But Taylor was already gone, a deputy explaining that he'd ridden out to the Blackwell ranch again with several men from town. "Looks like justice might be served sooner rather than later," the deputy commented, clearly pleased by the development. Zach wasn't so certain. The Blackwells were dangerous when cornered, and he worried about potential violence. "We should head back to the ranch," he told Sophia. "I don't like the feeling of this," she nodded, sensing his concern. "Let's go." As they rode out of town, Zach kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings, wary of potential ambush. But the trail remained clear and they reached his cabin without incident as the sun was beginning to set. Inside, Sophia moved to light the lamps while Zach checked that all was secure. The familiar routine felt right, as if she had never left. When he turned from locking the door, he found her watching him with a tender expression. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking how different my life is from what I expected when I left Boston," she said, crossing to where he stood. "I came to teach children, to build a school. I never imagined finding a home, finding you." Zach drew her into his arms, still amazed that he could do so freely now. "I never imagined any of this either. I'd resigned myself to solitude." "And now?" she asked, looking up at him. "Now I can't imagine going back to that life," he admitted, brushing a strand of honey-colored hair from her face. "You've changed everything, Sophia." They prepared a simple supper together, the domesticity of the task taking on new significance now that they had acknowledged their future together. As they ate, they discussed practical matters: how to secure the school against further attacks, whether to postpone the wedding until the current danger had passed, how to combine their separate lives into one. "I've been thinking," Zach said as they washed the dishes afterward. "Your cabin is better suited for the school than for living. It's closer to town, easier for children to reach." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. But what are you suggesting?" "That we make this our home," he said, gesturing to the cabin around them. "It's small, but we could expand it. Add another room or two. The land here is good for ranching, and it's not too far from town for you to reach the school easily." "You'd be willing to expand your cabin?" she asked, a teasing light in her eyes. "The same cabin whose roof you neglected for years." Zach smiled, acknowledging the irony. "Yes, well, I have more reason to care about it now, more reason to build something that will last." Sophia set down the dish she was drying and moved to embrace him. "I think it's a wonderful idea. This place already feels like home to me." Their peaceful evening was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders by the sound of it. Zach tensed, reaching for his pistol, but Sophia put a restraining hand on his arm. "Let's see who it is first," she suggested. They moved to the window together, peering out into the gathering darkness. A group of 5 riders was approaching, led by Sheriff Taylor. Relief washed over Zach as he recognized the others as men from town, including Martha Wilson's husband. He opened the door as they dismounted, nodding in greeting. "Sheriff, gentlemen, what brings you out this way?" Taylor stepped forward, his expression grave but satisfied. "We've arrested Ryan Blackwell for the shooting at the school. His brother rolled over on him pretty quick once we confronted them with Tommy's eyewitness account." "That's excellent news," Sophia said, joining Zach at the door. "Thank you for acting so quickly." "Had to," Taylor replied. Once word spread about the shooting, folks were ready to form a lynch mob, better to handle it through proper channels. Wilson spoke up from behind the sheriff. "We wanted to let you know right away, Miss Landry. The school can reopen now. It's safe." Sophia's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "That's wonderful. I'll make arrangements to resume classes immediately." The men nodded, pleased with her response. Before departing, Wilson added, "Oh, and we've already replaced that broken window. The school's all fixed up and ready for learning." After they had gone, Zach and Sophia stood together on the porch, watching the riders disappear into the night. The stars were emerging above them, countless pinpricks of light in the vast Wyoming sky. "It seems our problems are solved," Sophia said, leaning against Zach's side. "The school is secure, Ryan Blackwell is in custody, and we've decided on our future." "Not all our problems," Zach corrected her with a smile. "We still have to plan a wedding, build an addition to this cabin, and figure out how to live together without driving each other crazy." She laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet landscape. "Those are the kinds of problems I look forward to solving." Zach turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Sophia Landry, and I promise you this: you'll never have to worry about a leaky roof as long as I live." "Is that your wedding vow?" she asked, her eyes dancing with amusement. "To maintain the structural integrity of our home." "Part of it," he admitted. "The rest will be about loving you, protecting you, and making sure you never regret choosing this life, choosing me." "I could never regret that," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "You're everything I never knew I was looking for, Zachariah Jericho." As their lips met beneath the star-filled sky, Zach knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed forever. The solitary cowboy who had never bothered to fix his roof had found a reason to build something lasting, something worth protecting from every storm that might come. 6 months later, on a crisp spring day, the town of Rawlins gathered to celebrate 2 special occasions. The first was the official opening of the newly expanded Landry School, now housed in a proper building constructed with donations from the community and labor contributed by many of the parents. The single-room schoolhouse had been replaced by a 2-room structure with real glass windows, solid wooden floors, and a bell tower that could be heard throughout the town. The second celebration was the wedding of Sophia Landry to Zachariah Jericho, held in the new schoolhouse immediately following the dedication ceremony. The room was decorated with spring wildflowers, and every bench was filled with townspeople who had come to wish them well. Sophia wore a simple but elegant ivory dress that she had ordered from Denver, with a crown of blue flowers in her honey-colored hair. Zach, looking uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, waited for her at the front of the room, his expression transforming to one of wonder as she walked toward him on Bill Mason's arm. In the absence of her father, who couldn't make the journey from Boston, Mason had volunteered to give the bride away. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with vows they had written themselves. Zach promised to support Sophia's dreams as she had supported his, to maintain their home with the same care he now gave to everything in his life, and to love her through all the seasons to come. Sophia promised to stand beside him in all challenges, to make their house a true home filled with learning and love, and to never stop believing in the future they would build together. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled guests was so enthusiastic It startled birds from the nearby trees. Children threw flower petals as the newly married couple made their way down the aisle, and outside, the school bell rang in celebration. The reception was held on the school grounds, with tables set up under the trees and food contributed by every family in attendance. Zach and Sophia moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Even Ryan Blackwell's brothers came, somewhat sheepishly, to offer their respects. With Ryan serving time in the territorial prison, they had adopted a more conciliatory approach to their neighbors. As the celebration continued into the evening with music and dancing under lantern light, Zach pulled Sophia away for a moment of privacy behind the schoolhouse. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her close. "Completely," she assured him, her blue eyes reflecting the golden light of the lanterns. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible when I stepped off that train last year." Zach nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I have something to show you," he said, taking her hand. "It can't wait until tomorrow." Curious, Sophia allowed him to lead her to where their horses were tethered. They mounted and rode away from the celebration, toward their home in the distance. The cabin that greeted them was transformed from the solitary bachelor dwelling it had once been. Zach had kept his promise to expand it, adding 2 additional rooms and a wide, covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The roof was sound, the windows gleamed, and the entire structure had been freshly painted. But it was the new addition that Zach wanted to show her a surprise he had been working on in secret for weeks. He helped her dismount and led her around to the back of the cabin, where a new door had been installed. "Close your eyes," he instructed, and when she complied, he guided her through the door and into the space beyond. "Now look." Sophia opened her eyes and gasped with delight. They were standing in a small but perfect library, with bookshelves lining the walls and a comfortable window seat beneath a large window that looked out over the mountains. A desk sat in one corner, and beside it, a small table just the right size for a child. "Zach, it's beautiful," she breathed, turning in a circle to take it all in. "But how? When did you do this?" "Been working on it whenever you were busy at the school," he explained, pleased by her reaction. "I wanted you to have a space of your own for reading and writing. And for teaching our children someday when they come along." Tears sparkled in Sophia's eyes as she moved to embrace him. "It's the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me, thank you." He held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "I never thought I'd find someone who would make me want to build a future," he said softly. "Someone worth fixing a roof for." Sophia laughed through her tears, looking up at him with love shining in her face. "And I never thought I'd find a cowboy who understood that a sound roof is really about what and who it protects." As they stood together in the library he had built for her, surrounded by books and the promise of future generations to teach, Zach knew with absolute certainty that every repair, every improvement, every moment of care he gave to their home was an expression of his love for the extraordinary woman who had changed his life. The solitary cowboy who had once been content with a leaking roof now found his greatest joy in creating a secure haven for the family they would build together. And as they returned to their wedding celebration under the star-filled Wyoming sky, both knew that the story they had begun together was just reaching its first chapter, with many more yet to be written beneath the solid, protecting roof of the home they now shared.